Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches English Language. This video is going to focus on the Edexcel English Language Paper 2, but we're looking at version 2.0. This video is going to specifically look at questions 3 to 4, which is on the second text, so focusing in on language and structure. I'm using a past paper, it's June 2023, and there is a link to it in the description of the video, so it would be a good idea just to open it up and have a little read of the extract before we get started. There will be another video coming your way that deals with the final questions of the paper, so do keep your eyes peeled for that. But for now, let's get started. So we're back to information retrieval, retrieving implicit explicit ideas, AO1 for question 3, and they make it easy for us by giving us a little extract. So we've got Billy was giant striding along the goal line, counting the number of strides from post to post, 5 and a bit. After 14 minutes play, he touched the ball for the first time. Billy watched it fly in, way up on his left, then he turned around and picked it up from under the netting. Come on, Casper, make an effort, lad. I couldn't save that, sir. You could have tried. What for, sir, when I knew I couldn't save it? There's our little extract. And the question is, from the extract, identify one way the writer suggests that Billy lacks interest in the football match. So we know that we've got to choose one thing, and we know that we're focusing on how it suggests that Billy lacks interest. You don't need to explain anything, you just need to write it down. So you've got a number of things. We can look at the fact that he's counting the number of strides, like he's counting his paces rather than watching the game. The fact that Billy just watches the ball fly in suggests he's not trying to save it in any way. The fact that the teacher, the referee, calls him out for not making an effort suggests that he has no interest. And the fact that he's sort of really down on himself, like, well, I couldn't save it anyway, again shows a kind of sense of disinterest there as well. You could probably also comment on the fact that he hadn't touched the ball for the first 14 minutes. But I'm just going with something really simple. Billy was counting his strides rather than watching the game. Okay, so I've kind of done a bit of a combination of my own words and words from the text. It's absolutely fine either way. You can do either. So there's your easy little one marker getting you into text 2. Question 4 is slightly harder than anything we've seen so far, and that is because we're doing a language and structure analysis, language and structure combined. So we've got our question. The writer presents a school football match. How does the writer try to interest and engage the reader? So we're basically thinking, what keeps the reader hooked? Like, what is the writer doing to kind of keep that attention? And they want us to think about language, think about structure, and think about impact. Okay, now that does not mean write a paragraph on language, write a paragraph on structure, write a paragraph on the effect. No, every paragraph you write needs to have all of these things in it combined, but I'll talk to you about that in a moment. We're obviously using examples, so that means quotations. And again, just like before, we need to use subject terminology. So the first thing we need to think about is, well, what is the difference between language and structure? What counts as structure? So you've seen this list already. You saw it on paper 1 and you have seen it on question 2 from the previous video. Okay, but what you haven't seen is stuff about structure. Now, there are 2 types of looking at structure. There's sentence level structure and there's whole text structure, which I'm going to talk to you about in a moment. Some of your standard structural features to look out for are things like repetition, listing, like triads, or you might call them triples, or list of 3, rule of 3, all means the same thing. You might look at different sentence lengths or structures. So you might have a really kind of long, complex sentence to describe loads of action, and then a really short, simple sentence to describe a fall for dramatic impact. You can also look at things like sentence function. So are we using imperative sentences like commands, shut the door, close the window, or lots of questions, for example? Those are the types of sentence function. Looking at juxtaposition, which means contrast, sequencing, that's edging into whole text structure, and length of paragraph. You might end up with like a 1-sentence paragraph. That's obviously done for impact. Think why. So those are some of the sentence level features of structure that you can build into your analysis alongside language, okay? Because one quote might, for example, be a long complex sentence that includes a list of 3, but also has a simile in it, in which case you're going to analyse the whole shebang. But a whole text structure is something else, and something that is equally important, but also very, very useful in terms of helping you frame your response. So whole text structure is the way that the entire extract is knitted together. And in the examiner's report, it actually talks about how students who are able to look at the way that the text develops are more likely to secure the higher marks. So the things that you need to be looking for is the way that the texts begin and end, whether or not there are big juxtapositions between the beginning and the end, or maybe even parallels. You want to look at where there are changes. So I call that a shift in tone, a shift in topic, maybe even a shift in time. If you were really lucky, a shift in perspective if they gave you something kind of kooky. And then you're also going to think about things like paragraph order. So that's sequencing, you know, I mentioned it on the slide before, and use of discourse markers to guide you. So those are your firstly, secondly, thirdly, or on the other hands, or sometimes even like temporal discourse markers, like later that day, earlier on. All those things that help guide the reader. And what I would suggest you do is you use these questions to help guide you, both in like annotating, like figuring out what you're going to write, but then the actual frame of your essay. So if you think to yourself, how does it open? Where does it change? How does it end? You can't really go wrong. And just to sort of help you out, things like using topic sentences that deal with whole text structure is a really good way to get started. So for example, if you always think to yourself, all right, I'm going to tell the examiner why the opening of the text is particularly engaging. The opening of the text is particularly engaging because it focuses on. Then as you move through, as the extract develops, there is a shift in tone when, or shift in topic, or whatever it might be. The author guides the reader through discourse markers, shifting between X and Y. And then things like the ending paragraph parallels the opening because, or you could do the ending paragraph juxtaposes the opening because. But these sentence starters are ways to get into whole text structure. Okay, mark scheme. There is something incredibly important for you to be aware of in this mark scheme, and I have highlighted it for you there with a big arrow. Candidates who only consider language or structure cannot achieve a mark beyond the top of level 2. That's right, ladies and gents. If you only comment on language, or if you only comment on structure, you will not get beyond 4 out of 10. And in order to get that 4 out of 10, what you had written about either language or structure would have had to have been perfection, because that's like the equivalent of getting full marks for one side of it. So it is so important that you comment on both. That's why I suggest trying to like analyze aspects of language and structure in every paragraph you write, okay? The rest of the mark scheme is very similar to the mark scheme that you looked at for the language question. The only difference is that it just keeps adding in structure, yeah? Analysis of language and structure, selection of references, discriminating, precise use of a range of relevant subject terminology. So that subject terminology is now to describe language and to describe structure specifically. So let's have a little look at the text, thinking about how we would annotate. So I'm just going to talk you through it, but this is me thinking, well, how does it begin, right? Now that is a whopping start. That's brilliant as an opener because it's starting right in the middle of the action. You even have a little bit of ellipsis to kind of highlight the fact that we're right in the middle of the action. Now that's got a term, it's called in media res, in the midst, and it's very, very good for creating fast-paced dynamic moments because the audience is thrown right in straight from word go. And we've also got some language analysis that we can do as well, because we've got this adjective here, vital. suggesting that this game is incredibly important. And that's also emphasised by the fact that, rather jokingly, they have labelled themselves Manchester United and Spurs, when of course this is actually just a school game. We've got the descriptions of Mr. Sugden. There's all sorts you could talk about here about the sort of building anticipation being created, but I quite like this 5, 4, 3, 2 and then blowing on the whistle, because the reader is counting down with him. And then what we also have is some really kind of dynamic language, dynamic verbs: sidestep to tackle, cut it diagonally. Now notice, if you look at the way that this is almost like listed, Sugden running into the space, raises left foot to trap it with the ball. It's all very kind of fast paced, almost like it's a kind of football commentary itself. So that's obviously very engaging as well. What else do we have? Right, and then we've got the introduction of dialogue. So I think that in some ways demonstrating a shift even at the beginning of introducing dialogue to again demonstrate the stakes of the game. You know, you should have been moving, lad. The criticism between Sir and the boys. Hey up, sir, what do you think I am? You should have been moving, lad. You'd have caught it then. That, like, again demonstrates how important it is. So if I were writing on this bit, I would be starting right here, and then I'd be thinking, okay, right, let's look at where it develops. That's what we're going to do now. So straight away, we've got more dialogue here. You could have tried what for. So this is a little bit further down. So this is the dialogue between Billy Casper and Sugden. And I think really this dialogue is important because it serves this massive contrast between the way that Sugden is viewing this game and the way that Billy is viewing this game, because there's a huge juxtaposition, structural feature, about, like, there's a huge juxtaposition between them, the pressure that Sugden is putting on himself and the other players, and the fact that Billy can't really care less. And then we've got all sorts going on here. So, I mean, you could definitely comment on the winning goal suddenly became important, no more laughter, no more joking, everybody working, the repetition of the no more, and again, how serious it's got. I really like this simile. Most of the game, most of the boys had been as fixed as buttons on a pinball machine. So this idea of everyone just static and waiting and maybe being passive, sparking into life only when the nucleus, the footballers amongst them, had occasionally shuttled the ball into their defined areas. So we've got an extension of that image of them only sort of getting any kind of life in them when the ball comes close. So really, really nice language there. But what you can then do is that you can then look at how that's juxtaposed, so structure, how that's juxtaposed with the energy that develops as the game continues. And we've got this metaphor. The ball was a magnet exerting the strongest pull on the players nearest and still strong enough to activate the players furthest away. So as the text is developed, see, whole text structure, you've got these juxtaposing descriptions of the boys' activity versus passivity, which sits in overall juxtaposition with Billy and his whole apathy about the game. Then I'm thinking, how does it end, right? You always want to kind of think to yourself, is this a kind of climactic moment? Is this the height of the tension? And of course it is for us because we've got the goal going in. But first of all, we've got the description of Casper actually saving a goal, but it seems like he saved it by accident. And again, look at the kind of drama in the short sentences, no joke, no laughter. Those are what we call minor sentences because they're not like complete. They're fragmented ones. We've also got some great language choices here, again creating the drama of the climax of the game. It was a good corner, the ball dropping close to the penalty spot, a shot, blocked, a tackle, a scramble, falling, fouling, whoosh. So we've got listing there. It's all very fragmented, which suggests the pace. We've got nouns, like a scramble that sort of suggests chaos, and then we've got this great onomatopoeic word whoosh to describe the pace of the ball and moving the ball and the sound, the fact that it's capitalized as well for extra structure. So loads of things going up there. And then the final kind of moment in the extract is, of course, where Billy deliberately lets the goal in, and the description of him diving flamboyantly and making an elaborate pretense to save it. So you'd want to zoom in on the adverb flamboyant, which suggests that he's making a really big song and dance out of it, like it's really over the top. That's backed up by the adjective elaborate, but the climax of the ending is, of course, the fact that the other team scores because he lets it in, as you can see with the capitalized minor exclamative sentence goal. There you go. See how everything that we're doing, it's knitting together language and structure. That is the key. What not to do when writing it up. Okay, and I cannot express to you, whether it's this exam board, whether it's this paper version 2 or the original one, when we get that language and structure question, I see this opening sentence so many times, like over half the papers. The writer uses language and structure to interest and engage the reader when he says, quote. That's not the way to do it. You've got to be far more specific. The writer uses language and structure to interest and engage the reader when he says, and it's Manchester United versus Spurs in this vital fifth round tie. This is really good use of language and structure to engage, as the reader will want to know who is going to win the game. It's so vague. The topic sentence simply repeats the question with no specificity. The exam board do not want to see that. They state it regularly in the examiner's report that they do not want to just see the exact wording of the question. They want you to add in the details, the specific details. You can't just say language and structure. If you're going to put a device in the title, in the topic sentence, be specific. If you want to talk about a specific metaphor, but like I said, my preference is to go whole text structure in the topic sentence. But saying the writer uses language and structure is like saying he uses words and sentences. Well, of course he does. He's writing. There's no specific critical terminology in this little paragraph above. And again, there's no focus on the how and the why. That's what you've got to make sure that you're doing. So you need to be writing variations of your straightforward point evidence analysis paragraph. And this is what I would do. I would start with a point that focuses on whole text structure as a guide. How does it open? Where does it change? How does it end? Yeah. So at the beginning of the extract, the writer draws our focus to blah, 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 blah. Then your evidence, relevant, precise and concise quotations that back up your point. And then your analysis, which is where you are analysing why it's effective in engaging the reader. But this is where you can draw attention to a range of both language features and sentence level structure. So that warning that I gave you about the mark scheme, okay, that you'll get capped at 4 if you don't comment on both. If you can think to yourself, in my topic sentence, I'll do whole text structure, then I'll use the best quotes I can find that have something to say about language and something to say about sentence level structure. I'm hitting everything. And the most important thing is that you do squeeze what you can out of your quotations. So look at it. If you think, well, I've chosen this one because it's got a triad in it, right, well, don't move on until you've analysed one of the word choices and the impact so that you're doing both language and structure. Right, I've not written a full response. I've kind of just written a bit, okay, just to kind of get you started because I thought you might like to continue it. Who knows? But again, I want you to think about how I'm navigating between language and structure the whole way through. So the opening of the extract is particularly engaging as it begins in media res, catapulting the reader into the action of the match. See how much better that is than the writer uses language and structure to engage the reader. There is also an ellipsis which creates anticipation in and it's Manchester United versus Spurs in this vital 5th round tie. Immediately, the reader will be engaged by the presentation of the game as high stakes. The writer humorously refers to the school match as being between Manchester United and Spurs, suggesting they're taking this match very seriously, which is emphasised through the adjective vital. This sets the tone for the extract and helps juxtapose the character of Billy Casper, who clearly does not see the game in the same way. So do you see how I'm doing whole text structure there? By actually saying, right, we're setting up a kind of tone at the beginning to juxtapose with something later on. And I'm also doing sentence level structure and language at the same time. But I'm going to continue the point. There is also a sense of anticipation building through the description of Sugden, who stared at his watch, counting down 5, 4, 3, 2 before blowing the whistle. The use of the countdown creates a sense of drama that he too is taking the game incredibly seriously, which is echoed in the commentary style depiction of the game in the rest of the paragraph. As the extract develops, so this is me doing whole text structure again, as the extract develops, there is a shift in tone when the writer describes Billy, who was counting down the number of strides from post to post. This mundane action juxtaposes the action of the other boys who sidestep to tackle and cut diagonally, the verb phrases suggesting dynamism and pace. This is echoed in the dialogue, da 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 da. Do you notice how in my paragraphs I'm using more than one quote? There is nothing wrong with a PEAEA paragraph, okay? Especially if it's developing a line of point. Like the whole of this is looking at the opening, yeah? And the way that the opening engages you by creating this kind of sense of the stakes of the game, yeah? So everything I'm writing about there is about that. And even the juxtaposition with Billy only serves to heighten how other characters think of it as something to be taken very seriously. And then I'm moving on to a new point here, okay? And then you'd keep on going. Feel free to use my notes from before to help you have a bit of a go. That's it from me. I will be back with another video for you as soon as I can, looking at the comparison questions that look at both of those two texts, so keep your eyes peeled for that one. Otherwise, give me a shout if you've got any questions. I'll do my best to come back to you. Thank you so much for watching. Do subscribe, do share the videos if you're finding them helpful, and happy revising!